Good morning, everybody, and thank you for attending this morning's keynote speech. I'm with Notified. We're the biggest provider of virtual events globally with over 10,000 customers. So I'm going to talk to you today about hybrid events, but before I do, I just want to summarize very briefly where we've come from. And I think a lot of this was covered yesterday, so I won't dwell on it. But the before and during COVID phase, essentially, if we simplify it massively, before COVID, the success of an event was judged really on what primarily attendee numbers, operational excellence, and the feedback you'd get from surveys. There's probably a bit more to it than that, but the events were mostly in person, a few were virtual, and hybrid as a category didn't get a lot of demand. Those events did exist, but they were fairly rare. And ultimately, I think this lack of desire to go to virtual was driven primarily by a fear of cannibalizing the physical event. Just high fixed costs and high break-evens meant that anything that would discourage attendees from attending wasn't necessarily prioritized. And then during COVID, obviously everything changed. Everyone was forced to migrate to virtual, or some events were cancelled. And so content became that much more important because, ultimately, whereas before, if you didn't like a session, you'd go and have a coffee and network outside. Now you're one click away from going back to your emails or doing something completely different. And so what that brought was, new data, marketing grade data, a huge amount of extra data. We moved from badge scanning and registration to engagement metrics, chat analysis and sentiment analysis, the Q&A interactions were logged, and the attendee journey around the virtual event was also tracked. And so on to some stats. After COVID, 90% of our partner Encore, who conducted this survey, 90% of respondents within the events industry said that they would utilize digital going forwards. And that's a reflection on this new data that we've all got access to. And, 2/3, whether this is too high, I'll leave up to you to decide, but ultimately 2/3 of events professionals decided that hybrid would be a part of their go forward strategy. And, also the importance of live has become more important. It says here 66% of event organisers state that live sessions contribute to higher audience engagement, and I think as we saw yesterday morning with the pre-record, if that had been live, that might have been more of a two-way experience. So finally on this survey data, and probably the most important one, which is where the content for the rest of the presentation is coming from, is 71% of respondents said that connecting in person with a virtual audience is the biggest challenge, and that also came out in some of the panels yesterday. How do you do hybrid properly? And so I've got a few tips to get you going. It's not by any means comprehensive, but it's how we think about hybrid at Notified. And ultimately, what's it all about? Well, it's about connecting your audience, where they intersect before, during, and after the event. And what really for me this is, it's about widening the length of the event from being 1 or 2 days to being weeks and even months. And so what are the tips? So pre-event, let's kick off. Ultimately build out your virtual environment and open it early. What that means is you've got a virtual destination for both the physical and the virtual attendees to go into and start engaging with the content. So the first tip is create some agenda reveals. Open the virtual environment early, create a cadence of speaker announcements. So as your speaker announcements come out, send the emails, but have a link into the environment and post videos within the environment of teasers for that event. Secondly, promote your registration options. Promote those early and make it clear that you can have either virtual only, in person, hybrid, and get that open early. because ultimately this is where the content will be. So as I've already said, get the teasers and talks ready, get the speakers to record nuggets about what they're going to talk about to drive engagement. And to drive these early registrations, you can incentivize early attendees who are planning on traveling to have special access to your speakers, maybe the night before or before they go on. And it's the opportunity to have one-on-one networking with them, photo opportunities, and great to make those connections with high-profile speakers. And also use the technology to schedule the networking. And so this is, we talked a lot about the to and fro between exhibition stands and auditoriums to get the serendipity going. Well, you can help that on its way by actually looking at what each attendee is interested in and matching them using AI and machine learning to speakers. So you can actually, as we've done in this event, schedule one-on-ones rather than hope you bump into each other over a croissant. And then finally, surveys and polls before the event to help drive the content of the event. Why is that important? It's because really the content has, as we said earlier, become that much more important, especially to the virtual audience that really need to be kept engaged. So now that we've prepared the event, we go on to the live event. Here we are on the day. We've arrived at the venue, or we've got our virtual attendees. Use personalization more. Use again that data that's been gathered in the registration process, and also within the engagement within the virtual platform prior to the event to create content recommendations for the virtual attendees. A really important one, and one that was also featured yesterday in one of the panels, is have a dedicated virtual host. So create that sort of TV sport environment where you've got the live attendees hearing the speakers face to face, but also maybe a virtual host commenting and talking about maybe some of the stats that are coming out of the event, so that you get a different but tailored experience. So that when you arrive and you're a virtual attendee, you feel like you're not just watching people, in an auditorium. You've got your own event that's been tailored for you. And this point, streamed entertainment, that's building on my point from earlier, creating that backstage environment where you're able to see, how the sausage is made, so to speak, behind the scenes of the environment, rather than being there in person. And so that backstage environment will make the virtual attendees feel even more engaged. And then these next 3 tips are more probably of what you'd be used to anyway, being from the live event market, just making that live experience all that much more special by having entertainment, it could be comedy, just to make it really memorable. As well as using, next generation technology, the virtual reality headsets, artificial intelligence, augmented reality, to make it a bit more memorable for those who are there, so they can interact with the content in a different way. And then finally, the giveaways. I don't really need to talk about that much, but leaving high quality merchandise that people will keep in their homes or in their offices to remind them of the event. And then we go to the post-event. So it doesn't finish when people leave on the day. The real aspect of hybrid is it will continue your event way beyond the end date of the live. So tip number 1 there is activate the on-demand immediately as soon as the event's finished, so that people don't end up drifting. If somebody's listened to a really good piece of content, they'll often want to share it immediately. So have that ready as soon as the event finishes, and then add extra fresh content to keep people coming back, because in a lot of cases prior to COVID, probably the most senior person would go to the conference and listen to speakers and then come back and maybe brief their team, whereas now they can say, go and watch it on demand. There's a really good session which I think you'd like, and here's where it is, here's where to find it. So again, having that content available is important. There's also the opportunity to produce session highlights. So summaries of what was discussed, little snippets to summarise the key themes that can live within the virtual environment to keep people coming back if they need their memory jogged. And then having micro events, follow-up events that allow the environment to continue amplifying whatever the theme of the physical event was. So you're able to keep coming back and having follow-up live meetings within the virtual environment. And whilst you're at the event before it finishes, conduct attendee interviews. Have a video camera going around to ask people for their feedback, and then post that in the virtual environment. People love to come back and watch themselves on video and see what they said, and that again drives that engagement and that attendance within the virtual environment. And you can also schedule networking for afterwards. People who might have met and said, well, we didn't really get a chance to properly chat at the event. Let's go back and maybe meet virtually in the environment. That can also be a really good, powerful way of keeping the event going. And then, of course, finally scheduling surveys and polls so that you can then get feedback and decide on what the content should be for the next sessions, as well as looking at any questions that were posted on the Q&A that maybe weren't answered. That can also create really good follow-up content for your next event. So in summary, really, it's all about creating that always-on experience. It starts way before the event physically starts and it ends way after. And it's ultimately about capturing all of your audiences, not only those who went to the physical event or those who went to the virtual event, but those audiences that hear about the event from the attendees that can come and interact with the content afterwards. So it really is a way of making sure that, especially for those event organisers that are driving ROI, you're going to get way more eyeballs on the content on the event, which is more likely to drive to the outcome that you're after, be it create leads or educate your audience. So that's my talk. Thank you for listening, and hope you enjoyed it.